Well, as I mentioned before, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rob McCoy. I am your host for this webinar on increasing fertilizer efficiency with Holganix. This is that's me. It doesn't get any more exciting than that. One little tidbit of information is today is my birthday, and I started it off on a plane in the middle of the night on a delayed flight. So for those of you that are flying on a regular basis, I'm sure you can sympathize because the airlines are a mess right now. But happy to be with you and going over this topic, which I think is critical at this point in time, and hopefully you get some good information out of it and it's helpful for you. Well, that just went backwards, so we're going to go in the other direction. So what we're going to cover specifically, the role of soil microbes in creating fertilizer efficiency, some of the university data that we've gone through, real life case studies from some of our customers that have used the product, and then question and answer session. I would recommend that as we go through this, if you have any questions, you can put it into the little question box on the GoToWebinar tab, and then that way at the end we'll go through them all and make sure that everything gets covered. So one of the things that we want to consider as kind of an overlying factor in looking for fertilizer efficiency is the difference between nutrient-rich soil versus dirt that really doesn't have much life in it. We deal with different types of soil throughout the country, throughout the world, really. And we see a lot of different starting points, regardless of how much nutrient is in there, but really how much life is in there. And when we're talking about life, we have all these different soil microbe types to consider. It's an entire ecosystem that we have to pay attention to. We want to keep it in balance to create that efficiency. There are different types of bacteria, for example, that will do a specific job that can help with fertilizer efficiency, but you have to look at the second and third level of that as well. You can inject those forms of nitrogen fixing bacteria, for example, and get some better nitrogen efficiency. But how are they going to be supported? How are those bacteria going to be supported? And that's where the entire ecosystem really comes into play. So specifically with bacteria, just to highlight this, without exception, bacteria are involved in basic enzyme transformations that make possible the growth of higher plants, including our food crops. From man's point of view, bacteria may well be the most valuable of the life forms in soil. We are, the Bio 800 product is pretty bacteria focused. It does have a balance of other soil microbes in there, but we're very specific on the strains and families of bacteria that we want in there. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, when we're making our batches, we do DNA fingerprinting on it, so we get a readout of all the different types of soil microbes that are included in that, so that we can kind of check them off the list. We have our process in place where we know we're going to grow certain species that we need in there because they're the heavy lifters. They're the frontline blockers for us, and where we're going to get the majority of our results. As I mentioned before, we were looking to incorporate an entire ecosystem, and we want to focus on the diversity of that. If we were 100% sure on what was lacking in the soil in each specific situation, we could just put that in. But in most cases, we don't have the information or a way to get all the information about the soil in order to say, all right, here's the exact solution to the problem. So all we have to do is, for example, add in trichoderma, and that's going to solve our issue. That's going to complete the food chain within the soil, and we're going to be all fixed up and ready to go, and we're going to get all the efficiency that we need. So the approach that we're taking is that we're going to incorporate an entire soil ecosystem for the plant types and the zone types that we are focused on, in order to not rely on something else being there. That makes it so that we have much more predictable results. If you have experience in the industry, then you've heard of compost teas before. You've probably tried compost teas before, and they were very unpredictable. And we would always hear the term snake oil, because not that they didn't work at some point in time or with a certain plant in a certain situation, but they were just inconsistent in how they were made. Our processes are very specific as far as brewing times, temperature of brew, whether we're aerating or mixing. It's a in-depth process, but it's specifically designed to focus on certain microbes at certain times that we know we can increase populations of, in order to get the balance that we're looking for. So that if we went into an area like, let's say Arizona, for example, there's not a lot of life in soil in Arizona. We can have a plant that is just freshly planted, and rather than suffer from transplant shock, be able to incorporate Bio 800 and that plant feel as though it's in its native environment, and not have to frantically search for any nutrients that it can find, or be completely reliant upon the fertilizers that you put down, and not even be able to efficiently use that because the soil microbes aren't there to convert the nutrients into a usable food source for the plant. So we want to look at not only keeping things in balance, but we can provide a balance right off the bat, rather than trying to figure out a solution to a problem where we don't even have the complete problem presented to us. So fungi is another large aspect of the soil ecosystem. They degrade organic matter, consume bacteria, they protect the roots. In this picture, you have actually a pretty good example of endo and ectomycorrhizae at work. You can see the cloudiness around the root system there, and how expansive it is. All those fibers are fungi that are attaching to the root system and creating more pathways into the plant, for lack of a better term. If you have the ability to absorb more water and more nutrients, then the plant is probably going to get more water and more nutrients. So there's two different ways to really create efficiency for fertilizers within the soil. One is, can the soil produce more usable nutrients for the plant, and can the plant intake more nutrients? So the bacteria and fungi are kind of, in as far as their primary functions, they are working. One's working on one side of things, one's working on the other side of the things, and then you have a symbiotic relationship there, where you can really get a much better flow of water and nutrients to the plant. Then you have protozoa and nematodes. So without going into a lot of detail on this, there's supporting factors within that soil ecosystem. So, for example, you want the protozoa and nematodes to eat the bacteria and the organic matter, so that they can produce other beneficial ingredients for the other microbes. And there is thousands of cycles within that main cycle of that soil ecosystem, and you like cogs on a wheel, and working within a system of gears. You want each one of them to be functioning properly. If it's not, then through time you're going to create more and more of an imbalance. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on each one of those small areas. So it could be something as simple as making sure that there's an amino acid there, because one aspect of the soil ecosystem will benefit from the amino acid, and therefore keep everything functioning in an efficient way. And in turn, you also have to consider the metabolism of a plant, the metabolism of soil, so that if it's functioning properly, if you have a high metabolism, it can produce nutrients at a faster rate. The plant can grow at a faster rate, but not in a way that's harmful for the plant. You can, and not to throw anybody under the bus, but I was pulling into our warehouse site, and out front by the road, we have the largest lawn care company in the country takes care of the front section of this site. And there's an obvious difference between where we use our products, and where they use their products, but they're so nitrogen heavy that the plant becomes dependent upon that. Well, if the plant becomes dependent upon that, then it doesn't need to keep its other systems fully functional. And it will realize, like, all right, these roots don't need to go as deep in order to find the nutrients. And then when the roots aren't deep and the nutrients aren't there, that's when the turf really suffers. So if you just take an example like turf grass, which is a really simple plant in comparison to some of the plants that we work with, if you're going to only provide health for that plant, and I use that term loosely, when you're going to feed it, well, then how are you going to feed it all the time? In most cases, you're only going to be able to feed that every 6 to 8 weeks. You're not going to be feeding it every day. So as soon as that food source runs out, the plant can't get any more food on its own. Even though there's nitrogen in our atmosphere, the plant won't be able to access that, because the soil is not functioning in the way that it should, in order to be able to take care of something that is a free nutrient source. So here's a really good example. If you think about what I was just talking about, and versus, a forest versus a residential home. So when a residential home is built, was the grass there? Was the landscape there? Why does it take so much care to maintain those? Versus a forest, you look at the redwood forest, nobody's going out there and applying fertilizer. All those plants are thriving. They're running through their life cycles. Even when a tree runs through its complete life cycle and falls down and is just sitting there, it's degrading. The organic matter is breaking down. That's all beneficial for the soil. You hear a simple example of, like, when you're cutting grass, why do you want the grass clippings not picked up? Well, there's a lot of nutrients still in those grass clippings. So if there's bacteria and other soil microbes there in the soil to break that down, that's a usable food source. But if you don't have that active soil, then there's not really any benefit to it. It's just going to sit there and not get converted and not get used. So we want to provide what the forest is providing for itself already. We want to make sure that that soil is fully functional and making the plants feel as though they're in their native environment. A plant that feels as though it's in its native environment will function at a very high level. So if we're talking about farmers, you're going to increase yield based off of that, because the plant is in a spot where it thinks it's supposed to be, rather than just where it's planted and it's trying to figure out its circumstances and what resources it has to pull from, rather than the natural resources that it would automatically go after. So as we were discussing this, we're adding microbes back to the soil to keep it working, and we want to focus on that diversity. So, the name Bio 800, bio is obvious, the biological life. 800 stands for over 800 different species of soil microbes. And I can tell you that we are very conservative with the 800 number. And for those of you that don't know, the Bio 800 product, there's 5 different types of Bio 800. That could be lawn, golf, agriculture, tree and shrub, or bloom. They all have a slightly different balance to them. Same ingredients, different ratios in order to benefit those plant types best. We also are zone specific on each one of those 5 different types of Bio 800. So when you take something like Bio 800 Golf, for example, when we check the DNA fingerprinting, we often see the diversity in the 1100, 1200 range, not just the over 800. And as we are progressing, we're constantly evolving the product. It's little tweaks here and there. How do we increase these numbers and make it more beneficial? How do we get a better balance? All things that we're constantly working in or working on in our lab here and with third-party labs to really hone it in and make it as beneficial as possible, and trying to keep as much diversity as we possibly can in order to deal with every type of circumstance that we could possibly see out in the real world. So I've touched on Bio 800, but what is Bio 800? And what does it do? So you can reduce your need for fertilizers. You improve plant health and plant resilience against stressors, improve seed germination and rooting. And depending upon, if you're farming or if you're a landscaper or a lawn care company, you can differentiate your company with using a product like this. So let's go into each one of these things a little bit more. So for reducing fertilizers, if you have fully functional soil, or even efficiently functioning soil, you're going to need less fertilizer for the plant to fulfill that need. You're going to be able to improve the plant health. We see this example a lot with our tree and shrub formula. The best way to explain this is if we compare taking care of turf to taking care of trees and shrubs on a residential property. For both circumstances, in order for the plant to be healthy, if the soil is healthy, the plant's going to be healthy. It's going to be able to solve its own problems. In most cases, sure, there might be insect damage, there may be disease pressure, but it's going to be resilient enough that it's going to be able to take care of that. One of the reasons why we have to use fertilizer in a lawn care program is strictly for the aesthetics. People want a green lawn that's greener than their neighbors. Well, that may not be the natural green color of the turf type that you have in the environment that you have it. That doesn't mean that it's not healthy when it's not greener than your neighbors, but that's why we have to add the fertilizer. On the flip side of that, when we talk about tree and shrub maintenance for residential homes, typically the fertilizer is a total secondary thought. Because if the plants are healthy, they have the blooms that they should have, they have the foliage that they should have, and the resilience against all those stressors that they could possibly face. So when we're not concerned with is my magnolia tree greener than my neighbor's magnolia tree, you are able to build a program that's really focused on plant health rather than the plant aesthetics, and with the health comes the aesthetics of the landscape that you would want. As far as seed germination and rooting, we'll have a couple examples come up regarding that. The faster you can get a seed to germinate and get to maturity, the more resilient it's going to be. So when you have immediately the soil microbes there for that seed as it breaks open and starts to germinate, it's not searching for any resources. It's all there for it. It's able to grow at a much faster rate, and it depends on the plant type, but we've seen pretty remarkable numbers there as far as how much faster germination and the percentage of germination that we would get with using the Bio 800 product. Here's an example, and we've used this university study quite a few times, and this is actually just a sample or some of the samples of the university study on fertilizer efficiency. So we're highlighting NC State, Penn State, and Purdue in this one, but you can see when they're judging on optimum color and vigor, which when we were talking about lawn care or turf, that was a primary point of focus. NC State with using Bio 800 Plus found that you could do a 50% reduction in fertilizer and have the same result. Penn State was at 75% reduction, and Purdue was at an 88% reduction. There's some pretty remarkable numbers, even if you just take the NC State example at 50% reduction. And you know, based on fertilizer costs right now, maybe 2 years ago that wasn't such a critical thing, but when fertilizer costs practically double, and in some cases they're more than double, a 50% reduction makes it so that you can stay in business. It's not a luxury anymore. It's a necessity that you figure out a way to, rather than cut corners, than to be more strategic about how you're doing your applications, how you're building your program, and what you're incorporating in that in order to stay in budget and be able to provide a better result for your customers. So we're going to go through some of the case studies here. Broken Sound Golf Clubs in Boca Raton, Florida, they reduced their nitrogen by 20%. Not anything astronomical in comparison to what we saw in the university studies, but that was also, you know, that's a course that gets used for some PGA tournaments. So they're not going to take any chances on reducing beyond what they're comfortable with. But they also were able to reduce their fungicides by 30%, reduce their irrigation by 12%, improve rooting by 50%. And probably one of the more impressive measurables in this is their improved CEC, anywhere from 5 to 27%. They have 2 different courses there, and the results varied from course to course. When you're looking at 36 holes of golf, you're obviously going to deal with different circumstances on each hole because of soil type, the proximity to water, the amount of sun that it's getting, the age of it, how one course is newer than the other course. So, you know, that they're all going to be variables in there. But if you figure in, they reduce their nitrogen by 20%. Okay, great. But reducing your nitrogen by 20% at the same time that you're reducing your irrigation by 12% and improving the recovery time and improving the rooting, there's obviously a lot of benefit there. It's not just the reduction, but it's also the improvement at the same time. The Shrubbery specialist in Huntsville, Alabama, they did not have a number as far as their reduction in fertilizer, insecticides, and fungicides, but they said it was dramatic. And they actually had a very interesting example of the impact of the Bio 800. So they were taking care of a boxwood maize. And the boxwood maize was, you know, obviously very established. They're larger plants, but they were getting hit with a blight, and they could not figure out how to get that disease under control. They started doing Bio 800 applications there, trying to save the plants because of the age of the plants. They did not want to have to redesign how that maize was going to be worked. They were able to not only save the plant, but when they retested the soil 2 years after they started the applications, there was no signs of any disease in the soil. There was no pathogens left. So the good soil microbes beat the bad soil microbes, and they were able to save everything and it's all thriving at this point. Benert Greenhouse in New York, they reduced their nitrogen fertilizers by 10 to 15%, reduced their fungicides by 30%. And I think the key in this is, if you're in a greenhouse situation, if you're a grower, obviously the faster you can get that plant to maturity, the faster you can get an ROI. But if you're able to do it faster and reduce the cost of doing that, that's a win-win. So that's what they were able to do, and they've been using the product for, I believe, about 7 years now, and just swear by it. They don't replant any of their flowers without incorporating Bio 800 Plus. The Baltimore Orioles spring training facility in Sarasota reduced nitrogen fertilizers by 40%. And going back to the other example in Florida of Broken Sound Golf Course, how they only did a 20% reduction. That was a 20% reduction across the board. This is, the average baseball field's going to be 100,000 square feet, and it's easier to keep an eye on it. But they were able to reduce that by 40% and feel comfortable with it, and reduce their irrigation by 50% and reduce their reseeding by 75%. So obviously they were getting good results with that. But the other thing that was interesting is that field was actually built on top of a landfill. So they early on were dealing with a lot of predictability issues with the soil because of all the different debris and things that were in the base layer. And they were able to create predictability by dictating what soil microbes were there by using that product. And then they started, reaping the benefits of the reduction in fertilizer, the reduction in irrigation, which didn't take them a long time. Once they got that consistency, they just weren't focused on the reduction right off the bat. They were focused on, hey, we need to gain the predictability because we have the pressure of producing a high level product all the time. Because the Orioles were using the spring training facility at only a certain time of year, but that facility was still being used year round. So it had to perform at a high level. And I believe they also won the award for the top spring training facility in the country. I forget which year it was, but it was about 2 years after they started using our product. So obviously getting exceptional results there. Furman University in South Carolina, they reduced their nitrogen fertilizers by 40%. And they were doing fungicide applications in that section of South Carolina. They were getting a lot of disease pressure, and they were doing fungicide applications on at least a monthly basis, sometimes more often than that. And they were able to eliminate that. They only had to do curative applications here and there, which were section by section and single applications typically. So that was a huge factor for them. But they also, one of the challenges that they face on a university campus is the wear and tear that they were dealing with students, cutting corners on paths, taking different routes from building to building where there wasn't a concrete path in place. And they were able to not only reduce the amount of fertilizer, but increase the durability there. So they were able to keep that wall-to-wall grass coverage and get a quicker green up when they were going to do a fertilizer application. GrowinGreen, this is in North Carolina. So this is a lawn care company, and going back to the example before, where yes, you have to produce a result on the lawns and an agronomic result, but you have to be able to pay the bills. So the fact that they were able to increase their results and decrease their fertilizer by 50 to 70%, depending on lawn, but 50 to 70% is a huge number when you are doing that many properties and you're dealing with thousands of customers. That becomes a really big number when you start multiplying that out. Picture perfect as we work up the East Coast. They're in Virginia. They reduced their fertilizers by nearly 50%. They had thicker, greener turf. And when it says roots run deep into the soil, there was plenty of times where I get pictures from them where the 7-8 inch roots on residential properties, and they were just taking samples just to prove the point because they were so excited about it. But really good results there. And again, you know, the customers love to hear that you don't have to use as much fertilizer, you don't have to use as many synthetic inputs in order to get a lawn that's better than what they had in the first place. So another good example of a pretty extreme cut of 50% on the fertilizers and getting a better result. Red Diamond Tea and Coffee Incorporated in Alabama, they reduced by 45% over 2 years. And I think that's an important point, that they didn't just reduce it right off the bat. I will tell you that I write a lot of programs for lawn care companies all over the country. And we want to make sure that there's an increased result before there's an increase in reduction. So I will typically reduce the fertilizer amounts by about 30 to 40%, and then see it come down to about 50% in year 2. So it's not all at once, but it also depends on what your program looked like in the first place, where you're located, and how we want to balance out that program in order to reduce the fertilizers. If you're going to use straight urea, the fertilizer reduction may not be as much right off the bat because it's just not a high quality fertilizer. But if you're using a methylated urea, another example is switching to our Blue Sky fertilizer. It's a very high quality nitrogen, also has biological food sources in it. We can do a heavier reduction when we're not only incorporating the Bio 800, but also increasing the quality of the type of fertilizer. So there is, I believe there's a Calendly link in the chat section, but also there will be a follow-up email sent out. There will be a Calendly link in there. That is just a link to my schedule, so that if you wanted to schedule a call to specifically go over what you're doing and questions that you have, that's the best way to get me on the horn. That way you don't have to play email tag to try and schedule a call. You just go in there, find a time that works for you, and then I'll give you a call, and we'll get to talking. There'll be more university studies in the email that goes out, along with case studies, links for the case studies. So you got a very high level example of what some of those case studies are. And a lot of them you can really dive into the details, especially on some of the golf course ones. You can see all the data there, the application rates, things like that, that are a little bit more pertinent information if that's the avenue that you're going down. We have some upcoming webinars with Joey Franco of Daniel Island Golf Course, and he just did he's still doing a renovation of the golf course. It's a 36-hole course, and high-end course, and he is going to be on the webinar with us on July 13th. So we're going to be able to pick his brain, do questions on the fly, and see how his incorporation of Bio 800 product not only increased his results for the current holes, but also in the reconstruction process, how fast he could turn that around and get back to a playable hole. Another one, the very next day, building your lawn care fall lawn care program. Sometimes, we feel like we need a little tweaking coming out of the stressful summer months, and there may be something you can still do in order to change that up. And then grow your lawn care company, the fall lawn care marketing plan. That's July 21st. So I appreciate everyone being on today and spending some time with me. And look forward to talking with you in the future. Thank you and have a great day.